great to be here and talking with you. I spend my life traveling, speaking at conferences, and this is by far my favorite because my house is about 10 minutes that way. So I don't have the hassle of travel. But what I want to talk to you about today is about adaptability. And I was at the first Agile on the Beach. So I worked for Oxford Innovation and worked with Belinda and the originators of Agile on the Beach. But I've spent my time since away from Agile. So what I'm going to talk about is pretty close to what I do, but hopefully you'll see parallels in what you do. So as is the way in this conference, there's the QR code to give any feedback. All welcome. This is an area that I don't often speak in, so I'd be interested to hear your thoughts and your feedback. So who am I? Well, I started my career with a degree in engineering working for Airbus, the plane manufacturer. And I spent my time there realizing that Airbus is really good at making cockpits and really good at making aircraft, but they're not very good at making aircraft for the users. So everyone else that works for the aircraft beyond the flight crew, they didn't really think about it that well. So I persuaded Airbus to sponsor me to do a PhD. So I went back to university and did a PhD in psychology and created Airbus's first non-flight deck human factors team. So it was my job with engineers and psychologists together to actually make a change to Airbus aircraft. So I did fixed wing work for a while, and then I moved into helicopters. That's me next to a AW139 in the desert in Senegal. I also, along the way, was asked to apply my human factors, risk, and resilience knowledge to healthcare. So I've spent time working in healthcare as well. If anyone wants to know more about healthcare and the work I've done on resilience and burnout in surgical teams or in helicopter decision-making, let me know. But I'm going to talk about two other things, because along the way, I also set up a property business, which grew very, very fast, very quickly. And then a fashion label. My wife is a fashion person and set up a fashion label. So inevitably, I got dragged into that. So it's been worn by Kim Kardashian and Zoe Ball closer to home. So we had a fairly crazy journey with that. And it sounds chaotic. How can you go from aviation to healthcare to fashion? I think ultimately it was really down to that. How do I make things better or easier for the people that use them? That's the core of what I do every day, even if it's in a range of sectors. What I'm actually going to do today is not talk about any of the stuff I normally talk about, which is the aviation and healthcare stuff. I'm going to talk about my small businesses. And small businesses on their own are pretty small. They employ less, the terminology is actually less than 250 people. But actually, the majority of them are very small. They're micro. And in the UK, they represent 99.9% of the business population. So 99.9% of the people in this country work for SMEs. They also contribute just over 50% of business turnover. So they are a massive contributor. That's in the UK, but globally, the statistics are similar. The trouble is that they are fragile. So it's very difficult to maintain a small business operating at high profitability over time. So insolvencies have been going up since COVID. And last year, 21%, there was an increase of 21% of global insolvencies. In North America, it was 47% increase in global insolvencies. That is a massive amount, and it's kind of important to look at why that is. Now, the first one is the biggest factor. Rising inflation has had a massive impact on businesses globally. But there's a whole raft of other things, which I'm not going to go into. which has put massive stress on small businesses. So, the need to focus on costs, the need to look at how to approach disruptive technologies, disruptive competitors. For instance, all of these things are really put high demands on small business. And of course, if we look at the environment in which they work, it's hugely volatile. So fast fluctuating change. It's also uncertain, so you don't actually know where things are going with the certainty that we could before. Complexity, I won't bother going into complexity. We talked about that in the last speaker spoke about it well. Actually, there's lots of interdependencies. You can't, it's non-linear, so you can't say that is going to lead to that, to that, to that. It becomes far too difficult to model. And unambiguous. It's really difficult to know, if I do that, is that going to be the outcome? And this is not new. This is a very well-known set of circumstances. It makes risk management extremely difficult. If you're working in this kind of environment, how do you actually identify, analyze, and manage risk? Small businesses are not very good at business continuity planning. So actually thinking about risks, designing plans, having them ready to go if something goes wrong, and then just not very good at it. And actually, one of the things they don't spend enough time thinking about is how they can adapt. And I want to talk about that because, ironically, I was involved in Agile on the Beach when it started. I am a risk and resilience specialist in multiple sectors, and with my own business, I completely neglected it. I thought I was doing it. We were having stand-ups, and I was cross-training staff. I was kind of paying lip service to the way in which I could build resilience into my organization. And so I want to give you one model. So in 2016, this is basically one of our products in one of my businesses is all about turnaround time, getting the product to the customer as quickly as possible. And we'd been running at about 10 days, and we'd worked hard to get it to 10 days, and we'd been there for a while. And then we had a disruption, and I'm not going to waste my precious time telling you what the disruption was, but effectively it meant that we had to absorb this disruption, something we had to make sure that we could continue to deliver to the customer, but it became increasingly difficult to do it in the turnaround time that we wanted to. So the turnaround time, it increased, it doubled in the space of 16 weeks. And the recovery took an awfully long time. So to go from the bottom of the trough back up to where we were took a long time. So to recover by 8 days took 26 weeks. And that was not planned for. We didn't know it was coming. It was really difficult, hard to absorb, really difficult to recover, took a long time. And at the end of the day, there was no improvement. So it wasn't like we gained from that experience. It was kind of, we got back to where we were and we carried on. So we thought, okay, how do we do this? How do we change? And again, not thinking instinctively rather than how I should have done, we looked top down. So we said, okay, what should we as a management team do differently next time? And we talked about risk management. As I said, I teach pilots safety risk management. So I know risk management, and I know one of the things risk management is really bad at, and that is accounting for black swans. So actually the term black swan from Taleb, really useful piece of work. Black swans were then distinguished into three areas. The known knowns, so they're the things that we can sit here and say, we know that's going to happen and we're going to do something about it. Then there's the unknown knowns. They're the things that someone else knows something about, but we don't. So let's go and find out more about it. So we went into the National Risk Register. The UK government's had a National Risk Register for a long time. In there, we looked in 2016, and there was this little thing about respiratory pandemic. But actually, We knew that it had high consequence, but the probability was so low, we're not going to do anything about it. So we moved on. But clearly, we needed to do more than that. We needed to invest in adaptability and resilience. We needed to do something because we couldn't predict all the things that could go wrong. So we needed to actually build something that could withstand many disruptions. So that's what we did. We started thinking. The other thing I did is I looked at our business. And we kind of thought when we set up the business, and actually as it evolved and as it started to grow, we knew how work should be done within the business. And then we wrote procedures on how work should be done. And then we gave it to the people that did the work, and not surprisingly, it was different how we imagined it and how we wrote it down. And that was effectively, that gap was the critical piece of information. If we could understand that gap, then we would have a much better understanding of what was going on in the organization and how we could adapt frequently and easily. And that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to understand that. So I kind of spent a bit more time looking at resilience and all of the things surrounding resilience. So with a safety focus, as I do most of my time, there's an awful lot of noise around resilience as a concept, as you can see there. But I guess, when you boil it down, resilience is about a capacity to withstand or recover from difficulties. And that is, at its essence, what resilience is. But if you look at agility, agility is the ability to move fast and easily. So we want to be able to change and adapt the way in which we do things really quickly. So we can change direction, we can pivot, we can do things quickly. And actually, there's another concept which you may or may not have come across, anti-fragility. Anyone come across anti-fragility? So, yeah. So this is a concept, again, by Taleb from the Black Swan fame. And this is an emergent property, and it's something which is about thriving as a result of change. So actually, change happens, and you come out of the system in a better position than when you went in. So actually, we kind of looked at it in this way. We wanted to aim for resilient performance, and we wanted to combine these concepts. We wanted to be resilient, we wanted to be agile, and we wanted to be anti-fragile. And we kind of came across this definition. So when we face disruption, it doesn't matter what the disruption is, we want to be able to adapt quickly and easily. We want to be able to withstand, respond, and recover, but we also want to preserve and enhance critical functionality. That is the essence of what we wanted to achieve through this project. And just to give you some pointers and some analogies, I apologize if any of you are from the medical profession, because I'm about to butcher some really important concepts and simplify it. I'm a doctor, but not a real doctor. When I was on a plane, we had the call from the captain to say, medical emergency, is there a doctor? And my 10-year-old daughter said, "You're a doctor?" And I had to explain I'm not a real doctor, and spent the rest of the flight with people thinking I wasn't stepping forward. One of the things that I've learnt from my doctor friends is the skeleton is so much more complex than I thought it was. I thought it was a bunch of bones that grew, and that was it. What I didn't realize is that your skeleton is replaced every 10 years. So your bones are a store of calcium and phosphorus. So your body is continually using energy to break down bone and remake bone. And it happens all the time. And there's no kind of like bone master that's like controlling this. It kind of just happens over time. It just happens as you go. The body is continually adapting. And when you have a break, for instance, so when you have a disruption to that resilient system, there's a period of instability, and then the body puts loads of energy in to create internal stability. So it creates a really not elegant repair, but it's a repair. You get a big lump, and then over the course of a year, then it breaks down and it rebuilds stronger, but along the fault line. So your body is able to recover and deal with that. And for thousands of years, we've worked out that if you put a splint and you bandage it up, then you engineer a solution that supports the resilience of the system. And effectively, that's what we do, is we engineer solutions to support the resilience of the skeleton. We also have other disruptions to the skeleton, like osteoporosis, a disease where this balance between breakdown and repair is disrupted. So we understand the mechanism, we engineer a medicine that supports that repair process. And it's hugely fascinating. And there's a really good YouTube clip of Richard Cook, who talks about this so much more eloquently than I do. There's also the brain, which for any of you that were in here before, you heard about the brain and how complex the brain is, how it's building, it's changing all the time. You're building neurons, but you're also changing the way in which entire functions are dealt with in the brain. So when you learn to juggle as an adult, you are actually creating neurons and creating pathways to enable you to do this more effectively. And again, there's no control to this. It just kind of happens as a result of the inbuilt resilience of the system. And again, we've got, if you have a stroke, for instance, then the body is able to completely change. If you've got a damaged part of the brain, another part of the brain can take over some of the functions that you've lost originally. So you can do rehabilitation. We engineer solutions that support that change. So again, really good analogies to what is going on in the body. And back to our friend COVID-19, hugely imaginative virus with the mutations, and essentially when you get it into yourself, you either have an inbuilt natural resistance because you've been exposed to it before, or you have a vaccine which we've engineered and to support that process of repair and recovery. So those are kind of some of the things that we were drawing on when we were looking at, okay, what do we do within our organization, and how can we engineer solutions to support the resilience of our organization? So we did realize eventually that we can't look top down, we need to look bottom up. But again, even the terminology was how we used it at the time. You know, it's kind of, we went through quite a journey with all of this. So we actually, we got the whole team out of the office, we sat down in a room and we said, okay, why was that so difficult for us to do, to absorb, to recover, and to learn from that process? And what we actually ran a number of scenarios, and those scenarios proved to be remarkably helpful as the pandemic arrived. We did various things. One of the things we did was simulate the no access to the office. So, okay, what do we do when we have no access to the office? And just ran a simulation of what it might look like. We did another one where we took the management function out of the team. So what would you do if you had no manager to rely on in your day-to-day? And we also looked at, okay, what happens if the resourcing in the team just drops by 50%. So we ran scenarios and we looked at different things, and we came up with very specific solutions. So we said, okay, we need remote access to our server. So we could go away and within a week we had remote access to our server. We said, okay, we need to speak on the phone, we need to be able to move that anywhere rather than a wired system that we had before, so we went voice over IP. So really simple actions that we could put in place. But there was also a lot of work about how can we be more collaborative, be more self-organizing. And we kind of looked at it in terms of these resilient capabilities. So how can we be better at anticipating what's going to happen in the future? So how do we look further forward? So we recruited someone that was from an area of property that had a much better long-term view than we did within our organisation. We also wanted to look at how we could monitor better. So what are the weak signals? What are the leading indicators that would give us an idea that something is deviating from normality and we need to act on it? So we actually built solutions around that. We also looked at how we can respond. So how can we respond better to this kind of situation in the future? So it's about how can we reorganize, how can we make sure that we can deal with this, how can we communicate with customers and so on, in order to make sure that our response is as good as it possibly can be. And then how do we take some learning from it? So how do we get out the other side, learning the right lessons from the right experience? And so we used that as our concept to look at what we might do in the future. So we came up with these 6 areas, and these were the 6 areas that we wanted to look at as a business to actually understand what was going on. So if there's loads of this stuff, so I've just concentrated on some of the ones that I think would resonate with you as a community. So one of the things that was really important is observing one another's practice. So you've got 2 people doing exactly the same job. Well, okay, just sit alongside one another and understand how someone is doing something different to you. And then you can share good practice. You can understand a better way of doing it, or you can offer suggestions on a better way of doing it. And this kind of thing just then became part of the DNA of the organisation. This idea of understanding gaps between the way in which we thought work should be done to the way it actually was done. Self-organisation, which I'm sure has been mentioned in most talks already and will do for the rest of the conference. Leading key performance indicators, so how can we look at those things in advance? What are the things that will give us an idea that something is off? And we've got various indicators, and we've cycled through many. Some have worked and some have not worked. But it's the idea of it being leading rather than lagging, which is critical. Diversity, absolutely critical. Again, we were too focused in one particular area, so we needed to bring different ideas, different thought process. We needed to swap teams so that we could actually understand the perspective from different teams. And we couldn't recruit lots of Simons, which frankly would have been a disaster. But it was basically finding the right people, but not necessarily the same people, not going for exactly what we thought we needed, but actually just taking a chance on different perspectives. And then we developed, as again, you will be well aware of this kind of stage gating idea. So someone has a great idea, they are given time to go and explore, they then experiment, they come back and they say, this worked, this didn't work, can we expand? And this idea of stage gating, which just again became part of how we worked. And financially, we needed to look at how the organisation would fare in different scenarios. So we did a lot of work with the finance people. When we started looking at, okay, we've suffered a disruption. What do we do about it? How do we change the way in which we absorb what's going on, or how do we change our response? So again, it's about empowering decision-making, local decision-making, and monitor those response KPIs. So once something happens, how can we tell if we're doing well or we're not doing well in responding to this? Flatten hierarchies. So jumping to my healthcare experience, through COVID, one of the things that I did is I ran adaptation workshops with surgical teams. So actually, innovation in the NHS is an extremely difficult thing to do. If you're from the outside offering innovation, it's very, very difficult. And actually, frankly, even within the NHS, it's very difficult to bring innovation through. Because there are committees to make decisions, and there are leadership that you need to get approval from, and there's budgets that need to be sorted out. When COVID was happening, that disappeared. Hierarchies disappeared, committees disappeared, some of the risk aversion disappeared. You had doctors and nurses innovating every day on the on the wards, and they would see what's working, what isn't working, and the biggest problem they had was sharing those ideas. But this idea of flattening hierarchy, removing barriers to innovation, it was just happening. There was no organising it. It just happened. And the biggest thing, and the work that I was involved in, was trying to get these people together to share ideas. And that's exactly what we need to do in any business, is to, in the face of disruption, be able to come up with ideas, try ideas, see what works, see what doesn't work, share, adapt. And it was a really important part of our planning. So obviously consulting is consulting on the ideas, but also collaboratively deciding how we should move ahead, decision making. And that collaborative approach became what we needed to do. It was no longer top down, bottom up, all of that nonsense. It was really about actually understanding how we could collaborate together to make the best decisions. And then in the recovery phase, communication with customers, how we're dealing with things, debriefing regularly, sharing learning, and this idea of celebrating success and accepting failure. This was a really important part. The shame of failure existed within our organisation, as it does in many. So that idea of actually being allowed to fail, being actually embracing failure in order to learn and change. Again, from my aviation experience, I was involved in an aircraft accident investigation where the aircraft took off. So in Airbus, you've got two pilots, and they both have effectively joysticks to fly the aircraft, and one overrules the other one. So they took off, and the pilot flying banked one way, and the aircraft went the other way. And the wingtip was a meter from the ground before the other pilot took over and corrected, and they flew around, and it was all fine. Everyone, it landed okay, everything was fine. But there was a cross connection. One engineer had cross connected two wires in the flight control computer. And that's all it was. That was, it was as simple as that. Should never happen. Cross connection is sorry, I'm properly going off topic now. But the lesson was, so the operator that was involved in that incident took the engineer aside and said, no blame, what happened? There was fatigue, there was shift hand, there was loads of different issues that were going on, as we see in every investigation, pretty much. But the thing is that they said, okay, you've got a new job, and your job, should you accept it, is to go around and tell everybody about it, and what you did, and why you did it, how it happened, and basically that's what the engineer did. He spent the best part of a couple of years going around all of the stations, speaking at conferences about what went wrong. And that kind of acceptance that things can go wrong, but we can learn from it, is critical. So that knocked 5 minutes off my time. So this idea of, okay, we're coming out the other side. Well, what we want to be doing is we want to come out better than we went into the disruption, and this idea of anti-fragility. So if you are able to take those adaptations and say, this really worked, let's stick with it, or this didn't work, let's shelve that one, but we need to focus in this particular area and learn from it, is what we wanted to achieve. So I just want to share this one with you.
Heeded my words not, did you? Pass on what you have learned. Strength, mastery, but weakness, folly, failure also. Yes, failure most of all. The greatest teacher failure is.
I have spent a long time, 20 years, trying to get a Star Wars clip into a presentation. I think this was essentially the essence of what we wanted to achieve. This idea that failure is not something we need to worry about. Failure is something that we can embrace and understand and accept. comes with accountability. So it's not necessarily this complete release and allow for failure, but actually this idea that failure isn't shame, and we can actually go through a process of trying things and they not work, and you don't lose your job and so on and so forth. So that was kind of the journey that we went on, sort of 2017. Then came COVID. So what happened? We had a chance of putting in, seeing what happened when the pandemic started. So there's our original one that I've just talked about, and here's COVID. So we had this is the same product. We still hadn't improved. We were still sitting around 10 days, 9 days-ish. And then we then had to absorb, rather than the 16 weeks that this took, we absorbed it in 7 weeks. And then our recovery of 8 days, which was the recovery we had before, happened in 11 weeks compared to 26 weeks. We had some blips along the way, and that final bit of recovery was really difficult. And then we got to the other side and we weren't any better. So when you look at this, one of the important things we realized is that you can't look at this in one dimension. So you can't just look at turnaround time, because if we only measured success based on turnaround time, we didn't see results. But actually, when we looked at it in a broader context, we, as a result of this, developed a new product. And that new product became something that, I haven't looked at the stats, but I would say about 80% of our clients now order, and it represents 10% of the turnover of the organization. So we kind of came out with it in a much better place, and also we learned a lot about what worked and what didn't work within the process. So obviously what do we think was the key success factors? I think I've talked about all of them. Satisfying what the customer needs right now was important, especially through disruption. So customers were extremely accepting of the fact that things can go wrong. They were extremely accepting of what was going on, as long as we spoke to them and told them what happened, what we were doing about it, what was the result, and this continual conversation about adaptation and what was working, what was not working. The collaborative approach within our team, but also with our customers, was important, and this supportive learning environment, especially when we weren't together anymore. No, if someone had said to me a couple of days before the pandemic, you're all going to be working at home and you're going to be paperless, I would have told them they were completely mad. As many managers and leaders of organizations. But actually, the team, I had nothing to do with it. I walked in and the team had boxes set up with computers. They had, things written. It just happened. I just walked in thinking, well, what are we going to do? And it had all been done. There were spreadsheets set up to replicate paperwork trails, and it happened. It just, the teams went along and did it. And it was amazing. It was just so amazing to see. And then supportive in the fact that we were no longer together. We had an apprentice that had only started with us a little while before, went back to his home with his parents, and he sat in his bedroom and he worked in his bedroom for 8 hours, and then spent the rest of the day knocking around the house. And the support that the team could give him was amazing. And this principle of self-organization, this principle of being able to make their own decisions, make their own choices on what they do and how they work, was just amazing to watch. And I guess I want to talk about the next battleground. So we learned some really important lessons from all of that, but actually we need to think about what's next. We talked about resilience and the importance of resilience and agility, that ability to move fast while we're at the same time as being resilient. But we need to think about that next pillar, that issue of sustainability. So, as we know, climate change is having a massive effect, and it's having a chronic and an acute. So when we think about disruptions, we think about chronic stresses. So those are the things that are in the environment that are slowly making it really difficult for us. So within an organization, poor morale, for instance, it's a chronic if it's a chronic problem, it's just there in the background and the organization is just struggling on and on and on with it. And it has an impact on performance, but a slow impact. And then you have your acute shocks. So that's something has gone wrong. A pandemic is the extreme example. We all have to go into lockdown. We have to operate the business. So these kind of shocks. And climate change represents both chronic stress. So you get this creeping increase in temperature. You get the change in consumer demands towards sustainable products. And these are kind of slow stresses on a small business. And then you get your acute, you get your flood incidents and so on. So we need to be able, through an understanding of climate change and how that can impact us as a small business, be able to adapt to those kind of changes as well. So we need to sort of expand our definition of resilient performance. So we still need to do this. We still need to be agile. We need to be able to adapt quickly and easily. We also need to withstand and respond and recover, and we still need to deliver critical functionality. But we need to do it without compromising the future generations. So we need to be making sure that that becomes a pillar of what we do. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear from the keynote today is that AI isn't the answer, because AI is going to accelerate climate change effectively unless it's managed well. So, I'm a human factors person. I see humans as the asset that we've got, the asset that gives us flexibility, that gives us adaptation, because I've seen it firsthand in aviation, in healthcare, and in small business. So we need to continue to go on this journey of how humans work alongside technology in order to deliver resilience, be able to adapt, but also to ensure that we embrace sustainability. So that's it from me. I have thankfully left some time for questions. So if anyone does have any questions, then please do ask.
We've got 5 minutes, so again, really good. Thank you.
So when COVID happened, the NHS was like, right, yeah, people are just going to innovate now. Has that sustained?
No. Very little of it has, to be honest. I thought it was an absolute turning point in innovation in the NHS. To be fair, most of my healthcare work is in the US, so I'm not as close to it. But my wife is on the board of a hospital, and I know chairs of hospitals. And what I hear is that the innovation culture is not that much better than it was previously. I think there are some things that have improved, but I think that idea, because we need the safety barriers. We need to be able to ensure that innovation is safe and high quality and doesn't have adverse impacts, which we would kind of, because the situation was so severe, we could kind of put that to one side and focus on what was best for the patient right now. But unfortunately, I think, as you said, we've kind of headed back towards the idea of innovation being a complex beast in healthcare.
So you get to hang out in the dual spaces of systems that are changing, but also you said you're a people-focused person. Do you think that that's part of the challenge too, is that people are naturally averse to change?
I don't think they are. I mean, I've seen it, obviously. Some people are. I think there's I see it, some people are highly risk averse. I run an axe throwing thing for the team, and some of them are like, you must be kidding me. I'm not going anywhere near axe throwing. And others are like, yeah, jump in. And so I think it's personality. I think everyone says people are adverse to change. I think it's very much down to individuals. And I think it's about the culture that you develop. So within an organization, you need to design your risk appetite and what you're willing to risk in order to achieve opportunity. And I think that culture really affects the way in which people respond to change within an organisation as well. And that's essentially how we do it, is try to create the culture where change can happen, and then individuals, even within boundaries, come along with you.
If you guys listened to the previous talk, we had that 20% explorers, so we should make all the axe throwers the explorers. They're happy to go out and find new things.
Hi.
Just expounding on the experience with COVID-19, could you tell us more? My question would be along the lines of risk appetite, risk aversion, but how do you address that complacency compared to the previous strain with this recent one that was really adaptive, based on your experience?
So how the culture changed over that time?
Essentially, how do we address the gap of complacency of responding to that event compared to the previous one and the most recent outbreak?
I mean, I think it's a difficult one, because many organizations so small businesses learned how difficult it was to innovate. So when I was preparing a presentation for healthcare, and I was looking at small business, and they anticipated a massive increase in the number of insolvencies in the year following COVID-19. They thought COVID was going to hit, people were going to not be able to digitize or work remotely, and loads of businesses would go under. Actually, that wasn't the case. That it was not. It was the other way. And that showed inbuilt resilience of small businesses that we didn't realize we had. And actually, it's only been recently with the inflation that has caused massive problems. The supply chain issues have been significant as well. So many of the supply chain issues have not been overcome since COVID, and so that's still there. But I think that is, I think people have learnt about the value of resilience. I get a lot more inquiries from businesses wanting to look at resilience now than I did before. The idea of resilience was, people hardly even embraced risk assessment, let alone resilience. Whereas that definitely has changed now. Sorry.
I'm trying not to have it as a statement. How do you deal with environments where failure and learning from that sort of learning from failure or willingness to experiment can be quite challenging? The context I work in the nuclear sector.
Yep.
Failure can be quite bad.
Yes. I mean, I work in aviation, and it's pretty bad there too. You choose what you innovate and where you experiment. So I talk about, if you imagine you've got, so when you're going to maintain an aircraft, you've got an aircraft and you've got a set of tools and you've got a set of often physical manuals, and you look at what you need to do and you pick up the right tool and you go there and you do some work. They're developing technology where you can have AR glasses and the manuals are on there and it points at which tool you want to use to do your work and so on, which is great, but you need to do that with one team, not roll it out across your organization. And that idea of experimentation then is kind of acceptable because you can manage that well and you can resource it well. And I think that's how we need to look at it. This idea of experimentation, if you've got a new idea, we're going to roll it out in one hangar, not all three hangars. Or I'm doing work with eye tracking in cockpits. So where does a pilot look when they're flying an aircraft? Well, actually, you can point a laser at them, and you can actually read where their eyeball is going, and you can tell when they're getting sleepy and things like this. So again, it's about doing it slowly and doing it with small teams and doing it in a collaborative way with their organizations. So it's a tricky one, but I can probably give you more examples outside the room. Great, but I'm hanging around, so if you have any questions, then please do.
Thanks. Thank you.